Hi there, my name is Mackenzie. I'm a public high school English teacher in rural New Mexico. This is sort of a follow-up to a previous video I made, which is how to build a year-long English class. Specifically looking at AP literature, I use these strategies and these ideas in various ways across my classes as well. So this isn't just for advanced placement literature courses. I try to consciously break down the barriers between AP and regular English because I think it is sort of gatekeeping advanced work in a way. So that's why I'm saying that this video might not be helpful for everybody because you might not have these books or you might not be able to teach in this way. And so it's more just for me to remember what I've done, but maybe you get some ideas out of this. So as sort of a recap from my last video, I basically talked about the three things that I plan my whole class around, which is 1, become the character, 2, become the critic, and 3, become the teacher.
I understand.
So I start off my class by introducing students to sort of the type of work we're going to be working with, or the type of works. So, I want to get them re-engage with poetry and literature and novels specifically for an AP Lit class because there isn't going to be any nonfiction reading in an AP Lit class. So the first things first is that, I assign summer work knowing in my head that not a single kid will have their class schedule until the first day of school. And I usually just say this is your summer work because the first week of school is it's such a wash anyways. And I think anyone that really tries to pressure kids to work right away, you kind of need to take a step back and think about it. Why do kids need to be working day one when they don't know you and they don't know your expectations, when they just want to see their friends, I don't know. That's just me. So I say this is your summer work. And by summer work, I mean, we're going to work on it through the rest of the summer. So we started school August 1st. So they still had till the end of August to do it. So that's kind of how I played with that idea. And so I assign some sort of critical thinking nonfiction that's specifically about literature. I assign how to read literature like a professor. Now, I don't have copies of these books, so it does make it really challenging. I have them all create a Google Doc together, or I create the Google Doc with all the students on it. And I say, here's this book. There are sections of it that will be provided to you in class. And you need to all decide amongst yourselves who's going to read what chapter and answer the questions and do the chapter summary. You have until August 21st or whatever it is. And I sort of let them figure it out, knowing kind of in the back of my mind that it's not so much about who participates and who doesn't, but rather I'm using it to try and observe how they're engaging with each other and with the class. So is there a student that is doing their work right away? Is there a student that needs help with the reading and they don't understand, and so they're asking a lot of questions in the Google Doc? Are there students that seem to have not even accessed it at all? They need help with technology? Are there students that are being left out? It just gives me so much more information. And yeah, it's awesome that they're getting this reading, getting a little bit more insight. But really, I'm looking at it because I want to get to know the kids. I try not to approach anything with the idea that kids are going to be graded on it. The only things in my AP Lit class that I truly do give a grade on are essays. I give them a score, and I use the old AP rubric, the 1 through 9. And then every week I have them do a literary terms quiz. But so most of the point values for stuff in my class is 50 points, 70 points. My literary quizzes, I give them literally out of the number of questions. So if there's only 8 questions, it's 8 points. The whole point is just them get used to words just know what's catharsis, what is alliteration, just get used to hearing those words. So I don't care. They can take the test as many times as they want. They can get those points back. I don't care. That's not the point is not to get points or lose points. The point is to retain. And with the essay scores, I do give them a genuine essay score, but it's weighted in my grade book so that it actually doesn't damage their grade. So they have opportunities. So if they totally bomb an essay, it doesn't affect their grade poorly. The thing that does affect their grade poorly is just not doing the work and turning it in. So if you don't turn anything in, that is the only thing that affects their grade. I digress.
Let's stay focused.
So really, under that umbrella of become the character, the first unit I really do is I do a poetry intensive. And I use past AP released poems for this because it's a good way to teach also the structure of the test. Like, here's the question format's going to look like. Here's the font. I mean, like, everything. Like, I kind of have to assume, and I think many educators have to assume, that it's not fair for your students to not know what the expectations are. So I don't talk about the test a lot in the first 4 months of class, but I give them access to what it looks like. So like, this is what your questions are going to look like. I don't want to stress them out, but I also don't want to set them up for failure by not telling them there's a multiple choice until May. We do really intense poetry analysis for the first couple weeks. Kind of gets them a way to know like my teaching style too, and get used to me in the classroom. So if they've never had me before, because I kind of work outside the box, I'm a little bit verbose. And also they can kind of decide if they want to stay in the class or not. I try really hard not to assign a lot of homework. Usually the homework I assign is reading, just because there's not enough hours in the school day, and it seems kind of, I don't know, cruel to force students to sit and read in one of those cold little chairs for 50 minutes. Anyways, so I sort of talk about poetry in like the different expressions of poetry. So that could be literary techniques, that could be style choices, things like that. So I usually have like 3 or 4 poems that I use as like the master class. So this is where like I sit down and I talk like a teacher. I sit there and I say, this is how I read this poem. So I have a few that I do that, and I don't do them all in a row or anything like that. But I introduce them with this is like the most me heavy talking time of the whole class. And then I will give them poems that focus on certain things. So like point of view and perspective, focusing on a specific literary device. Poems that have a unique structure, like there's something about the actual form of the poem. Poems that focus a lot on imagery or evoking a specific emotion. And so we'll spend a lot of time on that because it's a great way to introduce devices because they're so blatant a lot of times. And also a good way to talk about the difference between author's voice and character voice. Now we get into the first big unit, which is, I know some people don't like this, but I do a tragic literature unit, specifically starting with Greek drama. The reason I start with Greek drama is because a lot of Western literature is based on similar themes, but also a lot of it provides a good foil, I guess, to other types of literature in other places as well. And it's considered such a canonical idea to teach Greek tragedy that it's a good place to start, because if you teach this is the prevailing way of thinking, then it basically sets up the whole rest of your class as a way to escape from that, right? So you kind of know what you're talking in opposition to. I guess that's how I think about it. So we read Oedipus, and this year I also had students read Antigone, which is my favorite. I love Antigone. By and far, the students loved reading Antigone. So I would definitely think about adding that in again. And so that is where, that is the whole time where we talk about myth. Like, what does it mean to make something a myth? Like, what's the difference between myth and fiction? What's the difference between myth and religion? And kind of start breaking down those barriers of, things that are right and wrong and where there's more gray area. We talk about plot. We talk about Aristotle's ideas of tragedy. I start introducing them to more collegiate reading. Where does the idea of the word come from? The spoken word or the written word? What did it actually mean to breathe out and speak words, right? Such an interesting concept. I even bring in Derrida. We talk about the idea of a pharmacon. How can something be both an antidote and the poison? How can it be the remedy and the pain? So thinking about duality or multifaceted elements of things to try and get out of this idea that there's always a right way to do things. Like, that's kind of what we're unlearning is, there's not a right way to do things. A lot of the choices, pretty much all the choices that are made by the characters in that could be considered making the wrong choice. But they still were the choices that were made. And the audience still responded to them, and it's still cathartic, and it's still weird, and it's still human, and it's still alien, and, it seems so cut and dry, but it's actually not. And this is where I have students also do their own research project, so they can research myths and religion and present it in whatever way they see fit. This could be even their own personal beliefs or familial beliefs, ancestral beliefs, but more of like, how do you tell a story? Or who do you pick as the character? How do you pick a character for a story? Who's going to be emotional? Who's going to be the best person to tell that? Then we usually do some sort of myth presentation. I have them read some myths to get really good ideas about illusions. So we read traditional Greek and Roman myths. Before, I didn't do it this year, and I really wish I would have. We also read sections of Knights of the Round Table, Arthurian?
Fading into obscurity, Arthuriana in all its many, many forms.
You know what I mean. And also sections of the Bible as well, just because they are used so much as illusions. They are just everywhere. And if you don't know what someone is alluding to, it's kind of hard to get the full picture. Characterization and plot line and emotions and imagery and things like that. And that's where I move to the second part of my unit, the biggest part of my class, which is becoming the critic and using critical lenses. So I start my students off with 2 lenses, which I think are the ones that are most easy to access. By nature of existing in the world, you have some immediate access to these things, which are critical race theory and like feminist or gender theory. Because no matter who you are, people have looked at you and treated you according to some idea of gender and race. The whole time I've taught this course is by using Their Eyes Were Watching God, which is one of my favorite books, if not my favorite book.
Here we go.
I have a really strong belief that at some point in your life, you will pick up a book and you will read it, and it will be the right book for you at the right time for you to realize something about yourself. And for me, I read Their Eyes Were Watching God in 12th grade, not as part of a class. I just happened to pick it up. Someone told me it was good. And for some reason, that book, I identify very little with most of the elements of that book. But God, that main character, it's just like, she just pulls something out of you. And it's written in such an interesting way. And so once we get through that whole discussion of character and we're reading these Greek dramas that feel very removed, I love to just transition to Zora Neale Hurston and this really grounded story. And so we read Their Eyes Were Watching God, and I introduce ideas of critical lenses. And what I basically do is I give students reading material and videos so they can choose how they want to engage with it. Do they want to read? Do they want to watch videos? And these are like academic sources, as well as internet sourced things. So there's varying levels of engagement. Wherever students feel comfortable engaging, that's where I want them to engage. I don't want to give them something that feels either like too watered down and they're like, this is so stupid, this isn't even anything. And I don't want to give them something that feels so out of grasp that they don't access it. Does that make sense? So
Enough.
We start with critical race theory and we talk about, okay, something easy to enter into. What does it mean? What is folklore or regionalisms or colloquial speech or accents? Okay, what are those things? Okay, now how does your accent or the way you speak connect with your race or your ethnicity? Okay, now what does it mean to look at works of literature through this critical race theory? Obviously, I did not come up with any of these ideas. We are leaning heavily on work that has been done much, much before my time. So then we start talking about what is critical race theory? How do you use critical race theory to look at texts? And then I give them a lot of videos. So like, what is race? How is dialect connected to race? How is race connected to bias? Things like that. How are different interactions in the book specifically connected to race, even when race isn't specifically mentioned? But then also, how are we reading the book connected to race? And we have lots of Socratic seminars and class discussions about this, and a lot of impromptu ones as well. Like, I cannot stress that enough. Impromptu ones as well. If a student brings up something in a class, I have been known far and wide to close my book and sit back down and say, forget today's lesson, let's talk about it. Because I think that's the best way to learn, is like when a student has a genuine question. Then what we do next, still with Our Eyes Are Watching God, because this is the first like book we're reading. Oedipus and Antigone are plays, so they're a little more odd. You could do weird reading structures like reading aloud in class or reading in groups. Their Eyes Are Watching God really needs to be a little bit more personal. So I do assign it for outside of class reading, and then I pull specific sections that we read together and analyze slowly together, like close reading together. Because that way we're building up some kind of reading stamina and skill, so that way they can decide how they want to approach the rest of the novels in the class. So then we talk about feminist theory or gender studies. So we talk about what does it mean to be a feminist? Sometimes it gets a bad rap, so we talk about that. We talk about like, what is gender? How is that different than sexuality? Or how is that constructed? Is that actually biological or is it made up? And this, most of the times I've taught this class, students are pretty much all on board with critical race theory. Gender lens is the one that I have noticed sparks a little bit more of disagreement. And so this is the first good way to sort of approach it, because there's going to be lenses that we're going to talk about later that are definitely going to be touchier subjects, just in that this might be the first time they're talking about it inside a school setting. And we do sort of have a rule that it's like, what's said here is said here. Not that like it won't leave or something like that, but it's like it's understood that what is being said here is because we're trying to have a dialogue around it. So students really, obviously students who identify as female have a lot to say about this, and especially about Their Eyes Are Watching God and the trials and tribulations that Janie goes through. And I think a lot of times teachers are almost afraid to teach books with female characters or female protagonists because they think that the male students won't get anything out of it. What I have found is all that it takes is for one male student to say that they like Janie, and the tide of the conversation changes. Like, then all of a sudden the rest of the students in the class are sort of able to be like okay with that idea. And being like, you know what, I actually like this female character. Or, I might not like her, but she's really interesting. And that is such a great moment, because then the rest of the class sort of opens up for us. I then sort of vary the books depending on the students that are in my class. So I haven't ever read the same book again next. I read one we did As I Lay Dying. Some students really like that, but I really didn't. I've taught Death of a Salesman. Which I am so shocked. That is the book that students always say is their favorite book that we read. I'm not going to lie, there are some students that do say Their Eyes Are Watching God is their favorite, but God, a lot of students say they love Death of a Salesman, which is so interesting to me. We've also read Dorian Gray, which I wouldn't recommend to myself to teach again. Especially because I teach Frankenstein later on, and I just really think that it's sort of overkill. And I would say that not a single student liked it. So I wouldn't teach it again. But anyways, that being said is that I usually would insert another book here or two. Like I've done like Death of a Salesman and Dorian, because it's so short. But the whole purpose is that this is where we teach the next three lenses, which are class lens or a Marxist lens, psychoanalysis, and queer theory, or in case you don't want to use the word queer, which I know is still up for debate in a lot of circles, and it's understandably You can use LGBTQ or gay and lesbian lens or whatever serves your needs in your class. We use the term queer theory. And then I did sort of have a disclaimer at the beginning that is not a universally recognized way to say it, or universally recognized name for the approach. Whatever text is chosen for this next session is mostly read at home. And a lot of the work that we're doing in class is back again to looking at excerpts and poetry from released tests and trying to apply what we're learning through the books to these short excerpts. So how, when a essay question is asking you about theme, well, what are they really asking you about? What theme? The theme of like unrequited love, sure, that might be a theme, but why? Why is the love unrequited? Is it because the man in the relationship is expecting something from the woman and she feels forced into reciprocating, and that's what drives her away? And so there's a gendered way to look at it? Or is it that this unrequited love is across class lines? And that's why there's a struggle. It's to give that other layer of critical, so to get kids to pull back and look at it in a different way. We do sort of a intensive study of Frankenstein because I use this as sort of a way to introduce genre novels. This is the first time I did it in this way. I don't know if I would do it this way again. But I teach Frankenstein because it's a really easy way to break up ideas. And because it's a frame narrative and it's so obviously bookended with different stories, so you can bring back things you already know, like talking about character. But then you can criticize so much about that book. And especially when you know the story of the author and ideas of the time. And it brings up great questions about morality. And what does it mean to have wealth? What does it mean to give life? Is there something to be said about, this creation of life that's separate from biology and is created by science? You can look at these ideas of what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be alive? So it opens the door to basically everything that's been working on so far. I think Frankenstein is good because it's Victorian and it does have some hard to access language, but it's also such like a classic idea that, I don't know, it seems like it still serves a purpose. And that leads us into, I've done Brave New World before. I really don't want to do it again. I hated it. I think the students really liked it, but God, I just hate that book. And it just feels like, and I introduced it with the idea of, there's a lot of things that are in this book that are outwardly offensive to me or feel very outdated to me. So if you feel that way too. And please be okay with expressing that. But what I have done is we did Handmaid's Tale, or rather excerpts from it, because I don't have access to the full text. And I really wanted to show either episodes or do episodes from the TV show. So I'm still working on this idea. I think that would be interesting. I've also assigned sort of as the bridge between that is that over spring break they read The Martian. And then we watched the movie just because to add some levity. And then the next huge section of the course is still thinking about critical lenses and critical theory, but it's all student choice. So I give them 3 novels that I want them to read. And I've taught these novels at other places in the course before, but I kind of liked doing it here. I don't know. It's just an interesting way to do it. So they could read Ceremony, they could read Bless Me Ultima, or they could read Obeson. And then what they had to do is afterwards, then they would discuss with people who'd read the same book and then decide what book they wanted to read next. So naturally, there's going to be one of the books that they don't read. And whatever text they don't read is the one that they're going to get instruction on. So that moves into the last section of my class, which is Become the Teacher, with them reading 2 out of the 3 texts. And then they need to teach one of their texts to someone who hasn't read it. And they need to think about all of the things that go into teaching. What's going to be important? Having kids memorize things, having them answer questions, having them ask questions, having a discussion about it. How many days do you need? Do you need activities? How do you introduce other things? And so we spend a long time actually with those 3 books, because that's all the kids are talking about for weeks, is just those 3 books, and dissecting them and looking at critical lenses and thinking about how they would teach them. I do like to finish off by sneaking in Hamlet. I think that teaching Shakespeare at the end of a class is the most helpful way if you're going to do it, because kids have trust in you and they're willing to stick with you through Shakespeare. So I teach Hamlet last. And then usually in an AP class, we do spend a short amount of time getting ready for the test. I try not to make that an overly long amount of time, because a lot of that time is also spent on kids doing their final project, which is them creating their course, which takes up a lot of the class time too. So like I said, this is the structure that I've used for the last few years, and this is because these are the books that I had available. And I also think that there's something to say for thinking about and balancing the type of works that are in your class. Obviously, I didn't reference like all the little excerpts and poems that we read, but I really try to be cognizant of whose voices I'm bringing in as well. Like you heard, a lot of the texts that we read are just plain old...
Something tells me I'm not gonna like this.
Dead white guys canon. But I think places where you can even push kids just to talk back against that is helpful as well. In the future, I think it would be really interesting to be able to add in some more recent novels. I know there has been a push at my class in my school to get copies of There by Tommy Orange. Anyways, so that's just me sort of going through my curriculum and my year-long plan for my AP Literature class. Hopefully that helps you get some ideas, or maybe that will help me in the future think about how I did things. So thank you for watching.